Here's something that should honestly stop you in your tracks. Deep inside pitch-black caves, places a human being would have had to crawl through freezing darkness to even reach, our ancestors were painting. Not scratching random marks, painting. Actual animals, actual scenes, actual art. Tens of thousands of years before anyone invented writing, before anyone invented the wheel, before anyone had any real reason you'd expect to bother with something so completely impractical. So why did they do it? Think about what that actually took. No electric light, no flashlight, just fire, probably a crude torch or a bowl of animal fat with a burning wick, casting maybe a few feet of usable light in a space that swallowed everything beyond it. And somebody looked at that situation and thought, this is exactly where I want to make art. Not at the entrance, not somewhere convenient. Deep in, sometimes over half a mile deep in, through tunnels barely wide enough to squeeze through. That alone tells you something. This wasn't decoration. Nobody's casually walking past these paintings on their way to dinner. You had to want to see them, badly enough, to crawl on your stomach through freezing rock in the dark to get there. And once you were in, what greeted you wasn't some crude scribble either. Bulls rendered with actual motion in their legs, horses painted mid-gallop, herds that seem to move if the torchlight flickers just right against the curved stone. Someone spent real time here, real skill, real intention. This wasn't idle doodling by someone bored around a fire. Whatever this was, it mattered enough to go through hell just to make it happen.
So if it wasn't decoration, what was it? Here's where it gets genuinely strange. Because the paint itself wasn't just found and used, it was made. Someone ground up specific minerals, red and yellow ochre pulled from the earth, black from charcoal or manganese, and mixed it with something to bind it. Maybe animal fat, maybe spit, maybe water. Nobody knows for certain. That's not an accident. That's a recipe. Somebody figured out a formula and then passed it down. And the tools weren't accidental either, blowing pigment through hollow bones to create a fine spray, using fingers, moss, even primitive brushes made from chewed twigs or fur. Different textures for different effects, a soft blur for a flank, a hard edge for a horn. This is someone thinking like an artist thinks, deciding how something should look and then figuring out how to make it look that way. Here's the detail that really gets under your skin though. Sometimes the artist used the natural bump or curve of the rock itself as part of the animal, letting a bulge in the stone become the shoulder of a bison, letting a crack become the line of a spine. That's not just painting on a wall. That's seeing an animal hiding inside the rock and pulling it out on purpose. And most of these caves weren't the work of one person on one afternoon. Layers of paint stacked on top of each other, sometimes centuries apart, meaning people kept coming back, generation after generation, adding to the same walls their ancestors had painted long before they were born. Whatever this place meant, it didn't stop mattering after one visit. It mattered enough to keep returning to.
Now here's the part that should really make you sit up. Painted handprints, all over these caves, hundreds of them, made by pressing a hand flat against the wall and blowing pigment around it, leaving a perfect negative outline behind. And when researchers actually studied the size and shape of these prints carefully, a lot of them turned out to belong to women and to children, not just to hunters, not just to warriors. Whoever came into this cave, this wasn't a boys-only club deep in the dark. Entire families, entire communities seem to have made the trip. Which raises an obvious question. Why leave your handprint at all? One theory is unbearably simple and also strangely moving. It was a signature, a way of saying, I was here. The exact same impulse that makes a modern kid carve their initials into a tree, except this kid did it 40,000 years ago in complete darkness, and it's still there. But some researchers think it goes further than that. In certain caves, handprints appear clustered near specific animals, almost like a claim or a ritual or a mark of passage. Maybe something a young person did once to mark becoming an adult, a rite that said you now belong to something bigger than yourself. Nobody can prove exactly what these people believed while pressing their palm against cold stone in flickering torchlight, but whatever it was, it clearly mattered enough to risk the dark, the cold, the narrow crawl through solid rock, just to leave one small permanent trace of themselves behind.
Here's where the story gets bigger than just ancient people liked art. Because the deeper researchers dig, the more it looks like these paintings weren't random decoration at all. They were tracking something. Certain caves show clusters of dots and lines positioned near specific animals, and some researchers now believe these aren't just artistic flourishes. They might be some of the earliest recorded observations of animal behavior ever made, possibly even tracking breeding seasons or migration timing. This might not just be art, it might be data, a record, information one generation was trying to hand down to the next, encoded not in words, because words didn't survive the way stone does, but in image. And that changes everything about what these caves actually were. Not just a gallery, maybe a library. A place where knowledge that could mean the difference between a group eating well or starving through winter got preserved in the one medium that could actually outlast a human lifetime. Which means the people crawling into these caves generation after generation, adding their own marks to the ones already there, weren't just admiring old artwork. They may have been reading it, learning from it, adding their own observations to a growing shared record that had already been building for longer than any single person could remember. Suddenly, this isn't just about ancient humans expressing themselves. It's about ancient humans figuring out, tens of thousands of years before writing existed, how to make information survive longer than they would.
Thousands of years later, scientists are still trying to fully understand what they're looking at on these walls. And honestly, some of what they found only deepens the mystery instead of solving it. Dating techniques on the pigments themselves have pushed the age of some cave art back further than anyone expected. Tens of thousands of years earlier than researchers originally assumed, humans were capable of this kind of symbolic thought. Some of the oldest known examples may not even have been made by our species at all, but by Neanderthals, a species long dismissed as less capable, apparently also crawling into dark caves to leave marks of their own. Researchers studying the placement of these paintings have also noticed something odd. Certain spots in these caves have unusually strong natural acoustics, almost like the artists chose locations partly based on how sound would carry, as if these weren't just galleries, but spaces meant for gathering, chanting, ritual, sound and image working together in ways we're only beginning to understand. None of this is fully settled science, to be clear. Researchers still debate how much of this was practical record-keeping versus spiritual belief versus something we don't even have a modern word for yet. But one thing keeps showing up no matter which cave, which continent, which tens of thousands of years ago you're looking at. The same instinct over and over to make a mark that outlasts you. So the next time you take a photo just to remember a moment, or write something down so you won't forget it, know that you're doing the exact same thing someone did in the freezing dark of a cave, 40,000 years before cameras, before paper, before almost anything else we consider modern at all.